We're missing a couple people tonight.
Mm-hmm.
This is
We're
weird. I
heavy
feel
on the
like
side.
Yeah.
We're going to tilt.
Mark had to come over to the dark side, I told him.
Oh, here comes Mark.
Here comes Mark.
Call to meeting the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for May 10th, 2021. Roll call, please.
Tony Gogenbach,
so glad to see
Mark
you.
Heidrich. Here. Mark Kleesner, Mark Piontek,
Here.
Tom Holtmeyer,
Here.
Andy Lucy,
Here.
John Borgman,
Here.
Chuck Watson,
Here.
Samantha Wacker. Here. Carolyn Witt.
Here.
Sal Maniaci.
Here.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I was talking to you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 12th, 2021 meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
There's first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to file number 3, file number 210501. The applicant is requesting approval for a special use permit to operate a vacation rental at 312 High Street. Sal?
Yes, so this is another request for, in our code, short-term vacation rental, or what commonly known as an Airbnb or VRBO. It is technically outside of the downtown district, and so that's why they have to come before you for a special use permit. And so they're requesting, the property is at 312 High Street, so I cropped it out here, but 3rd Street is just after this house up here to the north. And so it's pretty much mid-block here, right down from 3rd on High. It does have alley access in the rear, and they do have a garage. You can see the zoning here. This whole, there you go, let's zoom out a little bit more. This whole area is zoned R2 overlay, which means it allows for 1 and 2 family residential developments. As you guys, I'm sure, are all aware, we do not restrict on apartments or, rental or not. So I think there are a number of these that we have in our occupancy on this block that are rentals. But we require anything less than 30 days when it's outside of the downtown district to go through this process. And so they are asking to have approval of that special use permit to allow for rentals less than 30 days. They will obviously have to go through the inspection process, where it's an annual inspection rather than just between each tenant. And then they have to put in the exit light as well as a fire extinguisher that is visible. Those are really the 2 requirements that are on top of a normal residential inspection for an Airbnb. And then they obviously have to abide by all other zoning laws and nuisance laws. I know that's something that comes up often, that with Airbnbs, that just like any other homeowner, if there were supposed to be a gathering there, it becomes a nuisance. The police can take care of it, whether it's an Airbnb or not. And so we are recommending approval for this use, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any
Yes.
questions?
Yes, Sal, on those inspections, how are those enforced when they're annually?
So they have to reapply for a business license every summer,
Okay.
and then it's flagged at that point for them to get a new inspection.
And it's the same as a residential building inspection?
Yep, just with those 2 extra caveats that they have to have the exit light that lights up, just has to meet the code, and then a fire extinguisher that is visible.
And they check out at the stairs and the
Yep,
electrical box and all that stuff?
correct.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Sal, do you know offhand, other than within the downtown area, where is the next nearest Airbnb to this location, if you know?
I don't know for sure. I know there's one on Stafford right off of 3rd, and so that's within a couple blocks to the east. But I'm not for sure. We've had quite a few. There's 25. This would be number 26 now that's going through it legally.
Mm-hmm.
There has been some reporting that we're told there's closer to 80. That's why we're looking at that new software to try and find all of them. But that is the closest one I remember approving in the past few years. So.
Any other questions?
Pretty much all of them are north of 100 to the river. If you remember, I think the only one that's been denied so far was the one that was south It's either in Deer Run or Lake Washington, one of those.
Deer Run, so-
Yeah, most of the time, they're not even requested that far south, but.
Any other questions or comments of Sal? Anyone in the audience that would like to come up, please feel free to come on up to the mic, introduce yourself, where you live.
My name is Ron Snelson. I live at 325 High Street, which is across the street from that residence.
Are you directly across or a few up?
Catty corner.
Okay,
I want to know if there's a minimum number of days per rental, because I don't want to see a motel show up in my neighborhood. Who is going to do the background investigations on those people coming into that residence? Is it going to be a vacation home or a motel, commercial versus residential? Who will maintain the property? The number of guests per visit? And who and what is the market for this individual or for that particular house? Living across the street, I think I have a pretty nice house. And I don't think people would want to rent my house as a vacation home. I mean, I think it's nice, but someone from another state, I just don't think it's viable. If I'm going to go on a vacation, I want to upgrade. I want to go, you know, as a matter of fact, when I came in, I was going to say aloha, because that's where I go, you know, if I want to go on a vacation. I'm concerned about more homes being set aside for this type of setup. If the individual, I know there was a young couple living there for quite some time, houses are selling in that neighborhood very well. There's one across right next door that went up and was sold within a week. There was one at the end of the block that went up and was sold within a week. And they're selling at a pretty good premium right now everywhere that I've seen. So I'm just concerned about what this is going to bring to our neighborhood. How many cars are we going to have parking on the street? Although there's a building behind it, is it prepared to have a vehicle in the or vehicles inside, off the alley or off the street? I mean, I think most of my neighbors have similar concerns. And again, are we getting a motel or a vacation home? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sal, can you address any of those?
I can't answer all those. The applicant would be able to answer most of that, but what I can tell you, and this is kind of, you know, it almost doesn't matter, but the Airbnb and VRBO, which is primarily what the applications use, those typically have a 3-night stay, a maximum number of people, and they do their own background checks for you to create an account. Now, with that being said, just because we're approving a short-term lodging does not mean they can use that they can have their own application, they can do their own advertising. So I just want to give that caveat there that yes, those main applications, I know they run, you have to submit your license and they do a background check and have all the information in there. You have to be, I think, 25 to rent on both of those applications. I believe so, at least. They have told us that that's what they want to use, but again, this is just allowing the less than 30 days. If they wanted to go off that application and rent for a single night, they technically could. But I do know majority of it require a 3-night stay. And then it is 2 bedrooms, but again, if they could have a couch, you know, I don't know if that's going to say it sleeps 4 or sleeps 5, what they listed at. That's something the applicant would have to answer. They did let me know that they were going to be in Kansas City today, but I think they were going to send somebody here. So they may be able to answer some of that. as well. As for the parking, I don't know, maybe they can answer if the garage and back is available. I would assume it is, but again, if it's not, we do allow on-street parking for these uses, so.
If you would, come back up to the mic.
We have excessive parking on the street as it is. And it's having more individuals parking along there is going to make it even more challenging. I think the next house down has a young child. I'm concerned about and get concerned with children in the neighborhood when, that's a busy street and you start putting more and more cars in the street and an adult runs between those cars or steps between the cars. It's amazing if you count cars. And I can just about $11 on that side of the street from James to 3rd. That's without this house.
I can tell you that we really don't get into the marketing aspects of this type of permit. What they do with their house, selling or buying or whatever they want to do, that's up to them. So just wanted to make you aware of that. That has no market, doesn't have anything to do with planning and zoning. Unless we would make a special rule overall through the whole town, but yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else that would like to speak? Come on up.
Hello, I'm Tanya Meyer. I'm here on behalf of the property owners. They had to do a last-minute trip to Kansas City, so I know very little, but I will do my best to try to help because they couldn't be here tonight, and they apologize for that. But there is a garage on the property, but it will not be used for parking because the property owner wants to keep his lawnmower equipment and things like that to maintain the house. They're going to be doing some property improvements to the house to make it a lot nicer, and then also the person that's going to be running the property as far as the bookings, she's got experience. That's what she does now. She's a property manager. She manages a couple of buildings in the Washington area and a couple places in Augusta. So she's got experience with property management and taking care of vacation rentals. So
Do you know do they have a limit on guests?
they will through the VRBO and the Airbnb, there will be, yeah. I don't know that exact number because I'm just filling in at the last minute for them, so I didn't get to get that information, but yes, there will be.
Who is the property manager?
The property owners are Scott and Angela
Right, no, the
Garland,
manager.
and then the manager is Jessica Lieb.
Who, I'm sorry?
Jessica Lieb, she
Okay.
manages the Reserve out at Augusta, and she helps manage the Washington Business Center where Exit 11 is established.
Do these property owners have other Airbnbs in Washington?
No.
Okay.
Do they have any other in any other towns?
No.
Airbnb, okay.
Do you know how many bedrooms, maybe?
It's 2 bedrooms.
2 bedrooms, so probably the most would be 4 people.
I would say maybe 6 even, because he said there's a living room, you could probably do a seat or
So
sofa.
still could be a family size
Yes,
of 6
yes.
people would be no different than
Yes.
anything else.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be like a motel or,
Right.
it's just meant to be to have another place for people to stay that are coming into downtown Washington area, hopefully business owners, because we have a lot of connections through them. So it's just meant to be a vacation rental. I don't imagine it getting rented out a ton, and have a lot of activity, but it's just something that they wanted to offer.
What is the target market for this as far as, I know that some people do Airbnbs targeting like visiting nurses or, things like that. Some people target vacationers. I mean, when I drove by the property, I kind of had the same question in my mind of what's the draw with this and what's the market here?
Yeah, I think some of it's just they wanted to hang on to the property, not sell at this point, and so instead of it just sitting empty, they thought that this would be a great, we already manage several other properties, so thought it'd be a great way to, have that availability for people to be able to book. We work with a lot of businesses, so it's like, to be able to say, like, we have this Airbnb that you can come and stay at. So I think the market will be a lot of business owners, but that are in traveling, coming in for meetings and things like that, but also families that are coming in to experience downtown Washington. And
Any other questions?
I would say typically, the traveling nurses, we don't require the Airbnb or the short-term lodging because they're normally here for 3-month stays, because we do have a couple that do that, and they'll call and ask if they need to do anything special. But to the note about having a lot of our business owners do that, I will say with the lack of hotel rooms available, we do hear a lot of our Airbnbs will do long-term contracts where it's shorter than 30 days, but they will say, hey, every third week we're going to come in, because that way they know that there's a room's going to be available. That's been very popular with a lot of our short-term lodging. And I imagine that will continue until we see another hotel built, because we've had a study done that says we have a demand for about 110 more rooms. So.
Any other questions, comments? Thanks.
thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak? If not, any other questions, comments by board?
Do you have, I do have one more question. Do you anticipate when this will be ready to go?
Come on up. Come on up.
It's got to be on the record.
Sorry.
It's fine.
There's some updates that they are wanting to do, so I'd say in the next 2 to 3 months,
Okay.
once everything's approved.
Thanks. Anything else? If no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
First? Second? Who's second?
Mark.
Mark, okay.
These things are going away soon.
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. This goes to council,
Yes, a week from today.
so next Monday.
So yeah, the final vote will be next Monday at 7 p.m.
So we're recommending to council.
Okay. Last item on the agenda is the discussion item, Comprehensive Plan Review Committee, Downtown Mixed Use Overlay District.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I just want to have a couple things to discuss here. One of the second one, I know we talked about last month, and I'll get into that, but quickly, I wanted to touch on our Comprehensive Plan Review Committee. I think it's high time that we kind of get that going and start that conversation, because our 10-year of comprehensive plan will be 2023. But as you all know who were involved last time, I mean, I wasn't here, but that, from what I understand, that company that we paid to come in, the consultants that came in and did the meetings with everyone and the public meetings to get public input, they did that for months in advance. And so we are getting ready to put our budget together. And so I would like to have some discussions before I submit the budget on strategic plan, consultants getting in there. Our economic development strategic plan was done in 2015, so 2 years after, and I think there may be even some logic in maybe combining that. There's already an economic development arm, or a couple pages in our comprehensive plan that kind of fixate on that, but I think we could take the time to look at both of those documents, specifically our roadmap. That's as we grow, as our boundaries have been growing. We have those, I think there's 19 connections that we want to make future connections and improvements. We've made some progress on that in the last 10 years, so we need to check the ones we've done and then kind of start thinking longer term as we go south or west or east. Really, I guess the only place we won't go is north, and determine what roads we want to connect and what connections or what strategic goals we want to come up with. So with that being said, I was going to propose actually our July meeting. I was going to wait, and then our July meeting, because what I'd like to do is I'll start getting kind of a report card and kind of go through that strategic goals. We've started that once at the halfway point and kind of talked about it briefly, but I I figured we could, next month, we'll kind of hand out maybe a abbreviated portion of the strategic plan and the goals and that kind of thing, maybe a list of consultants that we have worked with in the past. I don't plan to go out to bid before then. That way you guys can kind of look at it for a month, and then in July, what I'd like to do, this is actually kind of up to you guys. I thought about maybe just having a 6 o'clock meeting right before 7 o'clock. I would just have a discussion item, but there could be a chance we could have 7 items on the agenda, and I don't want to be waiting. So my plan would be to have a 6 o'clock meeting in July, and then we would then have our normal meeting directly after. That's okay with everybody?
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay. So we will plan on that.
Can you send an email out just as a reminder so we can get in our calendars?
Yep.
If you don't mind.
Okay, so our other discussion item is our, I kind of been throwing out different names for this overlay district, but our potential downtown, oh, is it not coming up?
They're both out.
There it goes. Maybe. This computer's brand new, so it should be working. I just replaced it last week.
I knew this was going too fast.
Yeah. Something's got to slow us down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a frozen computer.
We can look maybe on our paper.
I'm just going to reboot it, and while I reboot it, I'll discuss it. Okay. So I know we talked about, there was an item on our agenda last month that actually was approved here for a rezoning to C3. It did go to council and was denied there, actually. But I think it was more so denied on the caveat that why not go after and maybe do this code amendment and do that first rather than approve it. I will also say the applicant couldn't make it that night, so I think sometimes that also has something to do with it when no one's there. But I told them that I would be coming back to planning and zoning first, and then we would actually probably do 2 meetings here, another discussion item, because this is something I definitely want some more input in. I did talk to Tyler King with downtown, but the intent of this possible new overlay district, or that would cover multiple zoning districts, is to really kind of create a anticipated growth area and a growth boundary for downtown. We have a lot of pockets that I think are definitely prime for development. Many of those are already in the C3 district, so we've kind of already covered that there. And once I get this pulled back up, I've identified some areas that I think logically would either go into mixed use or that zero lot line kind of development, and they're either 100% outside the C3, close to it, or they're kind of blocks that are halfway cut up by it. And so I think it'd be smart to maybe find some street boundaries. I will tell you, even just today, putting this together, the slides together after what I sent out last week, part of me is already thinking, why not even just go even a little bit larger if you're going to really think long term? And so that's why I kind of want something that we can all sit on and discuss. And I think something that getting it out to the public too, it's not necessarily, if there's a single family home on market that we're adding into this, we're not necessarily doing anything to their property. We're just basically saying, hey, if you guys ever sell or develop, the opportunities now are there for additional density and more uses. Hold on, it's coming back up now.
Do you think Market is a perfect street?
In reality, that request that we had last month too wasn't the first time that's happened. We've had 2 requests now. One of them was a little bit further away. That was denied last year than this one. But I will say, I'll get calls sometimes, people asking if they should be in C3, and they're, kind of the same thing. We tell them, hey, look, you're probably going to get a recommendation denial from staff just because you are removed from it, even if your end use is not necessarily out of order of the neighborhood, but we kind of explain that to them, and sometimes people won't even apply because of that. And so I don't want to be a hindrance to development if I think, hey, what you actually want to do is probably not going to hurt the neighborhood, but it just, we don't want to spot zone C3 is kind of the whole backbone of that reasoning.
Well, then again, it's like once you've got it zoned that way, I mean, that doesn't prevent somebody else from coming in and doing something a little more detrimental later on, though, too.
Correct, and I think that's why I like the idea of setting a potential boundary. Or in the idea, the intent is to send a boundary for this, because that's the whole thing with, like, the one last month. It was right on the edge, it was catty corner, but if you allow that one, and the next month someone a half a block comes down, at what point are you going to say, hey, look, this is, you're going to have to draw a line somewhere, which is kind of what this is doing. So again, the intent, I kind of had two here, but this first intent is more so just kind of mimicking the C3, but to allow a mixed use and higher density redevelopment projects in areas downtown or downtown adjacent that in the future are likely to be developed into uses similar to those in the C3 Central Commercial District. So kind of pretty much design it how we have it now. But really, I think the bigger goal will be to set a potential growth boundary of the anticipated mixed-use district. Because, I think there would have been a time, I think a really good example is Rhine River. There probably was a point where those properties down there we would consider downtown adjacent, or right outside of downtown. And once you start bringing in those mixed uses and higher density, that naturally just is part of downtown now. And I think that's going to happen with more projects as in the front page of the paper this weekend was, how downtown businesses are, downtown real estate's booming. And so I think it's natural that we're going to start getting a lot of these calls, and they could be kind of right on the fringe. And so these code allowances would be kind of to match the existing C3. I didn't want to get really complicated there and try to get creative. Just if we don't really have any issues with our current C3, it's just kind of expanding that boundary. But it's a zero setback. We currently do have setbacks in C3 if it is on the boundary. And so a good example is the new townhomes Andy did on Main. Those are all zero setback, except for the very last one has a 6-foot setback because it is next to R2. It's right outside of the C3. So we'd keep that. The outside boundary would still have 6-foot setbacks. No minimum lot sizes. No off-street parking requirements, again, because we don't want to encourage people to tear down a historic building because we're telling them they have to have parking, and that sort of thing. And then all the C3 uses that are permitted now, that's pretty much everything you get in C2, and then adding the residential and the multifamily mixed in there. There are a couple C3 uses that are light industrial because of the corncob pipe factory, and then when it gets to the distillery, micro distilling and micro brewing, those by the national code are technically industrial, but those are uses that we allow in C3 as well. So here's the boundary that I sent to you all, and I even say, as I was looking at today, I was like, I'm almost wondering if we could go a little bit further south with this. But the general idea here is to say, okay, this is the natural, we think, of the potential growth boundary of where we're going to see redevelopment projects and infill developments in downtown. And so I obviously went the boundary west. I stopped at Rhine River. As we all know, there's this apartment senior living just to the west of there, and then it's Elijah McLean's. Elijah McLean's was one of the, they went to planning and zoning, they withdrew it before it went to council, but that was one that asked for C3 last year, and for the same reason we recommend denial. I did stop here at this point just because of, that is the edge of our, currently of our zero lot line, and there isn't a lot of room for infill or redevelopment. I could see possibly some, if long-term, if these were ever redeveloped, but it's not like anyone's ever going to tear down Elijah McLean's and put something higher density. I would hope not, at least. So, but it goes that far west, and then goes down to Olive, and it goes south on Olive to 3rd Street. And the reason I did this is, as you guys know, this is pretty historically single-family on Olive and on 3rd Street here, and then I left out the Cedar Historic District, for I think obvious reasons there as well. That is already some of it's R1B, but there is some R2 in that area already. So if some of those larger houses go to 2-family, we already allow that, but I don't think we'd want to go any higher density or honestly encourage any major redevelopment there of any of those historic homes being torn down on Cedar. And so Though I cut down a little bit further south here on Elm, and I go to the back of these properties, which is because that's pretty much the end of Elm there at 4th. So at 4th and Elm is the last currently
That's right
zero
through
lot
that
line.
alley, huh?
What's that?
Right through that alley?
Yeah, I would cut the block in half, and I'll see that. I'll get to market. I'll explain kind of that as well, because these homes on Cedar are definitely different use than the homes you have on Elm that they back up to, or the properties on Elm. And so I'd include that. Go down 4th Street, all the way to Market, and then on Market, I cut the block directly in half. So basically, any of the properties that have access to Market would be inside this district, and the ones on the opposite side that have access to these streets that are perpendicular here, the north or the east-west streets, those would stay in the remaining zoning district and would not be included. And the reason for that being is it's pretty quick change here, and I think it's pretty obvious when you get to the zoning. This is a little bit more zoomed out here, but you can see it gets to the multifamily, strictly residential pretty quickly. From on Main Street, even once you cross Market, it gets pretty quickly. I think it'd be unlikely to see any mixed use on East Main and so forth on 2nd once you get further than that. And so that was kind of like my first shot of where I thought naturally we would see some redevelopment areas. Now, I just kind of highlighted, I'll have 2 slides here. I know there's a lot of color going on here, and I'll show you one with and without, but I've highlighted in orange, so that's the orange stripe is not a current zone district. These are properties that I think, just from driving around and knowing the area and kind of seeing what we've already seen requested, properties that are not currently in C3 that I think will naturally, eventually probably be requested for some type of higher density. And so all these potential development properties, obviously there's a lot more infill in here, but it's already C3. Everything that is orange here are properties that I just think would naturally have the potential for a higher density mixed-use development, but right now they would not be able to do that because they're not in C3. And so they would either have to come for a rezoning, and we'd have to, obviously this would be an easy one to go into C3 because you have it on each side, but some of these, if they're a little bit split zoned and not in it, and just so that's the corn cob pipe factory and that whole block down to the old recycle center. This is actually the Borgia soccer field. I don't think they have any intention of developing that, but just, long term, it is a big open green space, pretty central downtown, and we've seen a lot of development around it. This is the green lot behind Vino de Lafayette that the Elk Camps own. Again, a wide open space that I think it's natural to assume that we'll probably get at some point a request to develop that. And then here on Market Street, I think I could have highlighted a lot of this orange here, but the only reason I really focused on this block is we've already seen 3 corners of this go to 0 lot line. This is the only side that hasn't. And so on each side of these have already been developed to 0 lot lines, and it's strictly residential, but I think in this current zoning, they would not be able to get more townhomes or shared walls on this corner. And so that was kind of the idea of the boundary here. Now, I know as you go, let me do it with this one here, there are some single-family homes here on Market that have always historically been single-family, and I do include them, on both sides of Market here. But again, at this point, it's not like we're taking any uses away from them. They're not changing, it's not different. It's just that overlay district that allows for future development. If someone were to come in and buy up half a block, they would be in that overlay district. They'd be able to do that without having to go to a public hearing. So I know there could be 2 sides to that a neighbor that doesn't want to sell could now have a development going in right next to them. But that's also where I'm saying this growth boundary, it's a single family home, but realistically you're in the walking distance that if we're going to encourage and facilitate this walkable downtown, even just because you're in a single family right there, I think there's a chance that some of this could be redeveloped. And the last thing I'll say before I open up to discussion and shut up, I stopped it here on 4th Street, and the reason I did that was because this dark blue is already C2 overlay, which allows for 1 family, 2 family, and mixed use when it comes to retail downstairs, residential up. It still has setbacks.
Retail, what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's basically C2. It allows all of our general commercial, but it does allow like upstairs residential, because naturally there's a lot of things on 5th Street, and that's why that's so long and narrow. A lot of things on 5th Street are mixed in with residential and commercial along there. And that overlay district was drawn a long time ago because of that reason. We had to keep coming in, I guess, where people were having rezonings and requests because they wanted to do an apartment upstairs or vice versa. And so I didn't include that originally because it already does have some allowances with it being an overlay district, but not as many. It still has setbacks, it still has parking requirements, and it doesn't have as many uses as C3 would. And so I am open to the discussion, and I think I could be, I could be persuaded to possibly move this. Why not take this boundary down Elm to Fifth Street? And even though it's already an overlay district, but I'm thinking a good example, if someone wanted to redevelop Purcell, or even on any of these lots right around here, and wanted to do, if you look at historically on Fifth Street, there, especially on this corner right up here at Fifth and Jefferson, the Historic Society has some pictures of that. This whole intersection at Fifth and Jefferson was 0 lot line all the way to the corners. Just like the Washington Coffee Shop, there was 4 more at each corner. Right. So I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing for long term to say, hey, look, why not allow an overlay district that would allow Fifth Street to be restored to what it was historically? The 0 lot line, the mixed use, again, not the entire dark blue overlay district, but at least in this area, I could see why it wouldn't be a bad idea to allow this downtown boundary, growth boundary at least, to go to both sides of Fifth. Downtown Inc., they've actually been kind of, for their grant purposes, expanding their district. They often now go down to 8th. They go out to High for their boundaries. That's not anything in an official capacity, but when they apply for grants, they have to do a district, and they always go at least to 5th, most of the time to 8th. And so I'm almost inclined to come back next month with maybe, I'm fine with the rest of these boundaries. I think there's a strong argument why you wouldn't go further east here, but I think we could go a little bit further south and include both sides of Fifth Street in this area. And again, it's just allowing people, hey, long-term, these are kind of the boundaries, and if a developer were to come in, they would less hurdles for them to have to jump through. It does remove a public hearing process, but in a lot of developers' eyes, that is a positive. So.
Well, I know, Sal, when I was thinking about this before coming here, my vision of what that would mean, I really thought you should go up to Fifth Street. I mean, it seemed to make sense as a growth, and why wouldn't we allow the folks on Fifth Street to do the same thing in the rest of downtown and, make that a cohesive, I mean, Fifth Street, I always have thought of Fifth Street as kind of the boundary of just a natural downtown boundary. Why would we not let the folks on Fifth Street do the same stuff as the rest of downtown?
Yeah.
And I had that same thought, Sal, that we ought to come up where you make the jog between Cedar and Elm. We ought to come all the way up to Fifth and include Fifth all the way down to your Market Street, so that we cover both sides of the streets.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Rather than split the street, in my opinion.
So when downtown talks about their boundaries, don't they say front to Fifth? Or what is front to Fifth?
Yeah, normally they've kind of expanded it. Tyler said now they go to 8th often, but historically, when it's front to 5th, Market to High is typically how they describe their downtown
But
boundaries.
we are talking about expanding because the downtown is defined, is spreading, is growing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
I think east and west, though, Sal, you're right on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was one thing I did want to discuss, the western boundary here. That is kind of a sharp boundary, and I know that could be contentious in the future, but, I think there's even more of an argument that there's some multifamily up to 4 units in this area. Once you get much past Rhine River and these apartments, it is pretty much strictly single family.
I fully agree with what Mark said, Sal. I think your east-west boundaries are spot on.
Those are good.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're good.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay, so I will amend this and then hopefully kind of let it sit with the public. And we have, this Wednesday, we have our downtown core meeting, economic vitality and design, which all 3 of those groups are strictly focused on the downtown district. So I wanted to bring that to them anyway. So I'll discuss it with them Wednesday, and I'll amend that to go further south, bring it back with comments next month. And next month I'll actually have a draft code amendment I'll have to get with Mark on that. What I would assume I would do is there's a reserved section in there, and I would just add a new section number rather than, because right now our C2 overlay is just a section in C2, but this would go over multiple zone districts. So I'll
The
probably
only-
just write a new code section.
The only thing then too is like, I mean, what you're talking about is, off-street parking versus what you've already got on Fifth Street that you're needing off-street parking and stuff though too, correct?
Correct, yeah. So right now, C2 does technically require, the C2 overlay, require off-street parking. Now, there are some allowances there with historic uses and when it changes over. Obviously, like Tilted Skillet, I know that's often that comes up, but that was always a restaurant, even though it was vacant for a little while. And so there is allowance in our code that they weren't required to provide additional off-street parking, nor honestly would I have wanted them to, because what option would they have had
There was nowhere to go.
I mean, I know it gets bottlenecked there, but a parking problem is a good problem to have in a downtown, so.
Any other questions, comments?
It's good.
All right, thank you.
And what's the process then to do this? What do we all have to do for that?
So instead of, well, it'll still be a code amendment, and then I'll bring an actual draft and I'll work with Mark on it, but instead of it being like an amendment to C3, what I'll probably do is actually write a new section of code that will just add to Chapter 400 that will basically just have, I'll probably have an exhibit in there and have these boundaries written out. And so that way, we know that when someone applies for it, even if they're in R3, they're actually, that code also covers them because they're in the overlay district.
Do we notify the landowners in that area?
We don't typically, because we're not rezoning them, we're just giving them more uses, correct, Mark?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a bonus.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, comments? Is that all, Sal?
That's it.
Okay, I'll entertain one last motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, we went to Elijah McLean's Saturday
Meeting,
night.
Tom.
Oh, did you?
Well done. It was like,
They put some
speakers
speakers.
Yeah,
Friday night.
that might defeat the purpose a little.
Yes.
I think they should just take them down.